Oh, it's time for the daily Cortez video. I'm being facetious, but I've made several videos about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And look, you know, what I've said in the past is that I actually agree with a lot of her platform, except for the social democrat stuff. That's too far to left for me. I'm a social liberal, not a social democrat. So the healthcare is a human rights stuff, I think there's a lot of flaws in that argument. Banning guns, outright, I think there's a lot of flaws in that argument. Yes, there are bills in Congress to ban almost every gun. Research it, I'm not being hyperbolic. And there's other stuff like federal jobs guarantee, housing is a human right. This all goes a little bit too far. And as a social liberal, I'm just to the left of classical liberals. So I do agree with social equality programs to an extent. But Ocasio-Cortez is to the left of me and a bit too much. So I've been critical of her, but I do think she's not the worst person in the world. Unfortunately, today, she said something. I seriously, when I saw her say this, I busted out laughing. Just full-on laughing at, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be a dick, how stupid what she said was. Look, I'm not somebody who calls people's names and insult them and deride them, but I've got to point out in a harsh criticism what she did. You can see it here from Reason. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez says unemployment is low because everyone has 2 jobs. That is not how unemployment works, okay? They're not taking a list of filled jobs and saying, look, we have 300 million people and this is how many jobs are being worked, therefore unemployment is low. That's not how it works. Unemployment is tracked by people who are unemployed. Working 2 jobs doesn't change that. And she actually said this on PBS. And you know what, I can probably play this, we'll play this right here.
Not the left versus the right. Right. Now, the economy is going pretty strong, right? There's roughly 4% unemployment, 3.9% unemployment. Do you think that capitalism has failed to deliver for working class Americans, or is no longer the best vehicle for working class Americans?
Well, I think the numbers that you just talked about is part of the problem, right? Because we look at these figures and we say, oh, unemployment is low, everything is fine, right? Well, unemployment is low because everyone has 2 jobs. Unemployment is low because people are working 60, 70, 80 hours a week and can barely feed their kids. And so I do think that right now, when we have this no-holds-barred, Wild West hyper-capitalism, what that means is profit at any cost. Capitalism has not always existed in the world, and it will not always exist in the world.
Oh my God. She actually said that, and she's a politician. She is very likely, in all likelihood, going to be a congressperson. She won the primary. She hasn't won the actual election up in it's in November. But she's a New York district. There's not going to be any real Republican contender. And now she has gone and said something like this. Look, I did a video about her statements on Israel. Using this video, I didn't catch this part. I should have watched the whole thing. That's my bad. Because wow, now it's being caught. This is being caught today, only a couple hours ago, and it says from Reason. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, no, I wonder if that's autocorrect, was roundly criticized on social media yesterday for supposedly botching a question about the Israel-Palestine relations during an interview with Firing Line's Margaret Hoover. But Ocasio-Cortez's admission that she was no expert on geopolitics was much more satisfactory than her answer to a question about the unemployment rate, which she claimed was low merely because everybody has 2 jobs. This is wrong for 2 reasons. First, people working multiple jobs has no distorting effect on the unemployment rate, which is calculated by taking up the number of unemployed people and dividing it by the number of people in the labor force. The raw number of jobs being worked by Americans has no bearing on these numbers. That's an important thing to know if you're a social democrat advocating for higher taxes or reallocating taxes to provide a welfare net for individuals, or welfare programs, or basic income, or whatever it is. Second, everyone does not have 2 jobs. As Bloomberg View's Noah Smith points out, only about 5% of workers are moonlighting. This rate has actually dropped slightly over the last 3 decades. Ocasio-Cortez continued, unemployment is low because people are working 60, 70, 80 hours a week and can barely feed their kids. Again, the number of overtime hour Americans are, the hour, again, the number of overtime hours Americans are working has no impact on the unemployment rate. Ocasio-Cortez blames profit-seeking, no-holds-barred capitalism for the conditions in which people struggle to feed their kids. Hunger and poverty are indeed problems faced by millions of Americans. 14% of U.S. households experience food insecurity. Under capitalism, though, world poverty has declined precipitously. Over the past few decades, the economic growth that global trade has brought to developing economies has helped lift 1 billion people out of poverty. Between 2001 and 2011, some 700 million people exited from extreme poverty worldwide. Capitalism has not always existed in the world, and it will not always exist in the world, says Ocasio-Cortez. But the scale of human suffering was inarguably greater in the era before capitalism, and would be again in any post-market era, if socialism's failure rate is any indication. All right, let's, let me read this tweet real quick. So, Benny Johnson, who is a writer at the Daily Caller, it appears, said, confronted with booming economy and low unemployment, she says, unemployment is low because everyone has 2 jobs. Capitalism has not always existed. It not always will exist in the world. Well, as a definitive statement, to say that capitalism hasn't always existed and will not always exist is, well, that's an opinion. I would never say that. I think there's an argument to be made that capitalism has changed significantly, and it's likely to change in the future. But the idea that it won't exist is, it's a bold statement. Now, I'm a bit dumbfounded here that somebody who is going to be a congressperson has no idea how employment works in this country. And I'm not trying to be hyperbolic here. She insinuates that unemployment is low because of people working extra hours. She claims that people are working 2 jobs. They're not. She claims that if you're working 2 jobs, it somehow distorts the unemployment rate. I'm not a politician, and I know that. I'm not a politician, and I know that unemployment is based on whether or not people have jobs. And look, I didn't know about the 5% of workers moonlighting. Ocasio-Cortez has an obligation to understand how this works. Part of Ocasio-Cortez's platform is Medicare for everybody, guaranteed jobs program. It's, a guaranteed jobs program is particularly relevant in this matter. If she's claiming people are working 2 jobs and working 60, 70, 80 hours a week, and unemployment is low because of that, then what's the point of a jobs guarantee if unemployment is low? There seems to be a mix-up here. But you know what? I can criticize Ocasio-Cortez for a lot of things. Look, I'll say it again. I don't think she's the worst. There's a lot of stuff about her platform that I do agree with, but this was like a punch in the gut in terms of not knowing what the hell you're talking about. And something really interesting to me was brought up in the last video I did. The Democratic Socialists of America do not believe in borders. They have openly called for no borders, no prisons, abolish ICE, and things like that. So you have a lot of activists who say there shouldn't be borders at all. There are libertarians who believe that. There are far leftists who believe that. There are activists who are actively advocating for no borders, and the DSA is part of this group. My question then is, for somebody who's on the when you're on the far left and you say what Israel is doing is a war crime, the settlements in the West Bank, if you don't agree with borders, do you think Israel has a right to build settlements wherever they want? Israel is going into the West Bank, they're building houses and giving them to Israeli settlers. Well, if you don't believe in borders, you probably agree with that, right? This is one of the issues with the no borders argument that comes from people like Ocasio-Cortez and the Democratic Socialists. Now, I don't know if Cortez has actually said she doesn't agree with borders, but she has been endorsed by the DSA, and she is actively, she says it, she supports it. I think this might be one of the easiest arguments to make in terms of why borders are important. Open borders with no control, I don't agree with. Controlled borders, like we have now, I think is okay. We want immigrants to come in, we want to bring in people to join the economy and join our culture and things like that, but we control for it simply because when there are no borders, look at what Israel does in the West Bank. They show up, they plow people's property, they build settlements in Palestinian territory, and the West Bank is slowly eroding into Israeli settlements. So there's kind of a paradox. The far left is against Israel. The far left is also against borders. But you can't have it both ways, because what's happening is a really good example of what happens when there are no borders. People show up, do whatever they want, and you can't do anything about it. Maybe that's why some of her platform doesn't make sense. Look, I said I agree with a lot of her platform. It doesn't mean I agree with everything. It doesn't mean I'm not going to criticize her. As I mentioned, I was busting out laughing when I saw the video of her claiming unemployment is because people have 2 jobs. Because it is so wrong for a lot of reasons. Anyway, this is not going to be a rag on I've made a lot of videos about Cortez. I don't mean to be insulting or condescending. You know, it's not who I am. It's not what I do. So I appreciate her willingness to evolve on certain issues like Israel, her willingness to try and learn and better understand it. But I will add that as someone who's running for office, I do think she has an obligation to know more and do better. Hopefully she does. But at this point, her platform's a little paradoxical and the DSA is a bit too extreme. So anyway, stick around. I got a couple more videos coming up.